Hi everyone. This is the presentation we gave to the ITM LBP training days in July 2023. It'll take about 20 minutes to go through, and there's some really key points about insurance and risk management for builders and other trades in here. So enjoy. So the point here is please get in touch with us if there's anything that you're concerned about from a risk perspective, or if you have any questions about insurance. That's what we're here for. Probably the most important point for small business owners in the construction space is, and any, I guess, in general, that managing risk is one of the most important things you can do as a business owner, but it's probably not one of the priorities that you have on a daily basis, potentially even on an annual basis. You'll be doing lots of things to manage risk, but how well are you coordinating that, making sure there are no gaps, assessing it, reviewing it? Insurance is one small part of managing risk, but there's lots of other things you're doing. So just reflect on how well are you managing risk within your business? How do you prioritize it? And it's absolutely critical, because what nobody wants in business is for something to come out of left field and knock you off track, cost you money, cause you stress. So the more that you can eliminate those risks, the better. So I'm going to cover some of the key policies that builders will have or need to be aware of, some in more detail than others, and some are more important than others. So yeah, looking forward to it. The first and arguably most important is public liability, or general liability, or perhaps might be called broad form liability, depending on who your insurer is. It covers your liability for accidental damage to someone else's property. So those are the two key things to think about if something happens. Has damage been caused that's accidental, and has the thing that's been damaged belonged to somebody else? It doesn't cover damage to the works themselves, so the thing that you're actually working on. That's what contract works insurance is for. There's no cover for external water penetration through the building envelope, which is obviously a biggie, and we'll touch on that a little bit more shortly. And then cover for faulty workmanship under public liability insurance is complicated. So some policies won't have it in, some will have it but might call it the property being worked on, which is slightly different. And then others will cover faulty workmanship, but will cover it in different ways. So it's really important you understand what's in your policy. Is it appropriate for the type of risk that you have, the type of business that or work that you're doing, and that you have the right level of faulty workmanship cover, and understand really what that does and doesn't do for your business. So the way that I sort of explain it is to think about a bathroom tiling job, and the tiler's done a really poor job of it. It looks terrible. You'd consider the workmanship to be faulty, but it may not necessarily be a claim under your public liability insurance, because there's no actual damage that's been caused at that point. Now, if water then starts tracking through the grout and through a penetration in the waterproofing, and skirting start to blow out and mold starts growing on the bedroom wall next door, then that damage triggers a claim, and then you'll have a policy that covers repairs that damage and then replaces the faulty workmanship that caused that damage in the first place. So that's how you typically get cover under the faulty workmanship part of the public liability policy. Another key point is to make sure that the occupation that's shown on the policy reflects all the types of work that you do. So if your policy says builder, that's great, because it's nice and broad. It'll cover you for residential, commercial work. If it says new home construction and you're doing renovations, then it may well not cover you. If it says residential builder and you're doing commercial work, then again, it may not cover you. So it's important, if you are changing the types of work that you're doing, or you get a job out of sort of left field, that you do think, is my public liability insurance going to cover me for this work? And you either update the policy or make sure you've got a broad description on there that covers all the types of work that you might do. So coming back to that point about external water penetration not being covered, the background to this is that we had a leaky homes crisis, and there was potentially, and is potentially, billions of dollars worth of damage out there from water penetrating into buildings. Now, insurers couldn't quantify that, and if they can't quantify it, then they can't insure it. So they've developed this exclusion, and essentially it says that the policy does not cover any property damage arising from a failure of the building or structure to conform to the building code, in relation to leaks, water penetration, weatherproofing, moisture, or any effective water exit or control system. So it's pretty comprehensive. If water gets in from outside, then there's going to be no cover under public liability. Insurers consider any water getting in to be a breach of the building code, which says water shouldn't be able to get in, and that's it. And they take a pretty hard line to that. We're constantly having discussions with them about how it should work and how it does work. There is a little bit of movement around the edges with some insurers in relation to some types of event. But in general, it's safest to assume if you're in an occupation which is working on that external envelope, so roofers, waterproofers, builders installed in cladding or penetrations through cladding, you're not going to have cover for that risk. And so that's something you need to manage outside of insurance. There's a second point here that also says doesn't cover decay, rot, gradual deterioration. Now, claims related to internal water leaks are still being paid. So, you know, a shower waste that leaks, or a fitting on a toilet that blows, that kind of thing. We are seeing those claims paid. So just bear that in mind. The next important liability policy is statutory liability. This covers your liability for fines and penalties in legislation. Most commonly, that's prosecutions for health and safety related events where WorkSafe is prosecuting. Now, it legally can't insure the fine under health and safety legislation, but it will cover all the legal defense costs and any reparations awarded to an injured party. So we know that those types of prosecutions are becoming more common as they take a harder line to this stuff, and there's potentially big bucks. So that's the main reason that builders and other trade professionals would have this cover. But there are also fines under the Building Act, the Resource Management Act, and under the Fair Trading Act, where you can fall afoul of those acts and be in line for some significant fines. Some statutory liability policies will also cover LBP complaints. So the cost of defending those to the LBP board and any fines that might be awarded against you. Often that's not a core part of the policy, but can be added, and it doesn't cost much, and sometimes it's free to add. So that's something to consider whether it's relevant to you. There is also a dedicated policy for LBPs, which will cover those complaint costs and defending complaints to the LBP board, which we understand and expect will become more common over time. Complaints cost nothing, and homeowners love complaining. And with your new code of conduct, there are more things to complain about as well. So it's a bit of a no-brainer if you want to have a little bit of cover to cover those fines and any risk of someone making a complaint. These policies aren't super expensive, so something to think about. They'll also cover the risk of negligent supervision if you're supervising non-LBPs and something goes pear-shaped, and any records, errors in the paperwork or records of work that are submitted to council as well. There's a bunch of other liability policies as well. I'm not going to go into too much detail on those, other than to say if you have employees and that employment relationship goes pear-shaped, then there is cover available to pay the legal costs and any compensation awarded in the event of a dispute that goes to the Employment Relations Authority or through a legal process. That's becoming more common, and construction's not the greatest industry for people complying with their sort of legal employment obligations in terms of how they deal with dismissal, bullying and harassment, and that discrimination and that kind of thing. So something to bear in mind. If you have an employer's liability policy, which you may have, which will be probably a very cheap policy, that's not what this is. That is for accident or injury that employees suffer, where ACC doesn't cover it, and they hold the business liable for their costs of that accident or that injury or that illness. Could be illness, and that's commonly things outside ACC would commonly be sort of mental health related things, stress related things, where they hold the business liable for those costs. The other one I do want to focus on is cybercrime. This is a significant and fast-growing area of risk for individuals, but also for big businesses and small businesses. And small businesses, and particularly small construction businesses, are at significant risk here. And you may not sort of think it, because you don't operate a website, or you're not taking payments online, or don't have tons of customer data in your system. But the reality is that you often will be involved in high value transactions. People are paying deposits and they're paying progress payments, and one of the hackers' favorite things is to get into a system, change the bank account details on invoices, and then lo and behold, your customers are paying the hacker's bank account and not yours. And we know from giving these presentations around the country, we had a number of people in the audience say that this had been precisely what happened to them. One guy lost 60K, and that guy's plumber was sending out invoices for a month, wondering why he wasn't getting paid, and turned out same thing had happened, and his money was all being paid to the hackers. So it doesn't take much for someone to click on a link and a criminal's into your system. They can sit in there, learn how your system works. They can scrape passwords and watch keystrokes, and change bank account details in your Xero account if you haven't got all the appropriate safeguards in place with two-factor authentication and appropriate training and processes. So really important in that cyberspace that you do have regular training, good systems, you've got strong passwords, you're not using personal devices to access work systems unless you've got appropriate security. You have all those two-factor authentication processes in place for key systems like your accounting software and your bank accounts. And that will really reduce the risk, but it won't eliminate it. You've also got to think about the risk of your IT provider being hacked, and that has been the case in a number of claims where the managed service provider, the IT provider who's looking after your system, is the one that's hacked, and they go down. Consequently, your systems go down. That could be the provider of your internet services, just the IT company that looks after your network. It could be the provider of the software that you're using, the application, your project management applications or your accounting applications. And then how do you run your business if you haven't got your project management software available? So all of those risks mean that this is something you need to really look into, make sure you're resilient as possible, your staff know the risks and are trained, and then there's obviously also insurance available. Now that insurance actually typically comes with an incident response, and so they have the service there to work with you to reduce the risk or to recover once an event has happened, and then you can get compensation for costs and losses. But the main value of it is that you can ring the 0800 number and they will help you turn around the problem that's occurred. Another key policy for builders to be aware of is contract works insurance. This covers accidental damage or loss to the works themselves. So if it's a new build, then the builder typically arranges it, covers any damage to that build as it's under construction. For renovations and alterations, then typically the homeowner arranges that because they can do it with their existing house insurer, and that's just nice and simple. And most contracts will say that. Problems do arise though when homeowners haven't read the contract, so don't realize that is something that's their responsibility, or they think the builder should insure this stuff, or it's too hard or it's too expensive and they don't end up doing it. And that's a problem for you if there's damage that you're responsible for that would have been covered by that policy that isn't because they haven't arranged it. So we always recommend that you ask the homeowner for a copy of the insurance certificate where they're responsible for arranging it. Then you can file it away. You can also diarize dates like the expiry. So if the project is delayed or the sum insured increases, you've got reminders there to make sure the homeowner extends the policy or increases the sum insured. And we have seen claims where the policy has actually lapsed and the damage has occurred after that end date because the project had been delayed and had run on. Or the contract value initially was 100 grand, the scope of work increased to 200 grand, and lo and behold, there's $150,000 worth of damage, and they're underinsured. And again, like I said, if that's even if it's the homeowner's responsibility, what does your contract say about who has to pay if the builder's responsible for damage and yet no insurance has been arranged? I bet it doesn't say anything. So you need to ensure there's some sort of penalty clause or something clear in the contract if the homeowner hasn't arranged the insurance as they're supposed to. Another key point is to remember to have an agreement about who pays the excess in the policy. Because again, if it's a natural disaster or some event that's not your responsibility, it shouldn't be you that's paying the excess. Another thing that can catch out young players is the expiry of the policy. Now you may think, well, it should just expire on the date that the policy says it expires. But contract works insurers don't want to cover occupied dwellings or buildings, and they don't want to cover completed buildings. So the policy says it'll actually end on the earlier of the expiry date, or when the owners move in or start to occupy the building, or practical completion. So if either of those two dates is before the expiry date on the policy, that's when it'll end. So you need to be aware of that. So there's a couple of things. If owners move in early, you need to be ringing the insurer to say, and this is an example of a new build, that owners have moved in, please can we keep the contract works insurance in place even though there's people living in there. And that shouldn't be a problem, but what won't be covered is any damage that the owners themselves cause. And then obviously if it's finished early, if it's practically complete, but a final inspection or a CCC is some weeks away, then you have a potential gap in cover. So you need to ensure the policy has a completion cover extension in it, which will just bridge that gap, make sure that contract works insurance can be maintained post practical completion and for a period, usually 30 days, to allow the homeowner to arrange their own cover, so there isn't that gap. There's no cover for faulty workmanship under contract works insurance or for faulty design or materials. So again, those are risks that aren't insured, and you need to be managing those outside of insurance through another risk management kind of practice or process. And lastly, no cover for external water penetration because of that building defects exclusion. Now, that doesn't mean, if you've got the wall off and or the roof off because you're doing an alteration and it rains, that you haven't got cover. Of course you do. That's just a weather event, and there's no building code for you to breach in that instance. It's really more about when the build is completed and you're still within the maintenance period and someone hasn't installed a flashing correctly and water leaks in, you're not going to have any cover. With your vehicles, tools and equipment, it's pretty straightforward. Just make sure you get the sum insured right. On your vehicles, if they are commercially insured as they would be for business, the typical way they're valued is at market value. So that's what you need to make sure you get right with your sum insured. And also be aware of the difference in the way that insurers will interpret this. So, or their policy, what their policies will pay. So some will cover the market value, but to the maximum of the sum insured. So if you've insured it for 20 grand and the market value is 30,000 when it's written off or stolen, you're only going to get the sum insured, which was the 20. And equally, if you've insured it for 20 and the market value comes back at 15, you're only going to get the 15. So you're going to get the lower of those two. There are other policies, and ours is one, where you get the market value regardless of what the sum insured is. So you insure it for 20 and the valuation comes back at 35, that's what they're going to pay. Now for tools, the key thing is to make sure they're covered for replacement value regardless of their age, and watch out for fine print that says we'll cover replacement value unless the items are more than 2 or 3 years old, in which case then we'll just cover them for indemnity value, which is bugger all. Check your theft excess. Is it 1,500 or is it 2.5 grand? Because that can make a difference. And then actually check what the policy does cover in terms of theft, because some won't cover theft from a vehicle at all. If it's so, and the difference between theft and burglary is burglary, there's got to be some forced entry. So the vehicle's been broken into, or the site or the container. If there's some sign of forced entry, you'll have a lower excess, typically $1,000. If it's theft where the vehicle's been left unlocked or tools are left out on site or the container's unlocked, you'll have a higher excess. And then some policies won't cover theft from vehicles at all. Our policy will cover theft from a vehicle when it's parked at site. So we know that during work hours, your vehicle is often unlocked on site because people are going to and from it. So you've still got some cover there. So we're coming to the end now. Just a quick headline on professional indemnity insurance. This is important if you're engaging designers, architects, engineers or surveyors or those other professionals, and you have some responsibility for their work because you've engaged them, you're the main contractor, they're billing you and you're passing on that cost to your customer. And as far as your customer is concerned, you're supplying those services. And if there's any errors or mistakes, you potentially have some liability because of the errors of the subbies or the consultants that you are supplying to your customers. So you could be liable for those errors. Potentially, even if they haven't been engaged by you, the main contractor is always one that can get dragged into these cases. So it's something to be aware of. And professional indemnity is what those professionals will have in place if they make a cock up, but often their terms and conditions will say, if we make a stuff up, our liability is limited to 2 times our fee or a certain small number, and you've agreed to those terms and conditions by taking on their services. So there is no compensation above those agreed limits, in which case you might be caught in the middle. And so your own professional indemnity insurance can be valuable in those cases, as well as actually thinking about replicating those limitations in your own contract to your customers so that you aren't stuck in the middle. You're also limiting your liability for errors in design and surveying and engineering, if that's a service you're providing as a design and build builder or whatever it might be. Okay, so in summary, managing risk is about more than just insurance. Insurance is one part of it, and it's an important part. Now you can pay a premium to an insurer, and if something happens, then they will compensate that loss. They will cover it. But there are some things that just aren't insurable, and some things that it's just not practical or cost effective to insure. And so that's where you are responsible for that broader risk management. And that might be training, it's engaging lawyers, it's being members of associations and having written contracts. It's about systems and processes that you have in place and the people that you work with. All of those are parts, all those are risk management strategies, and insurance is just one part of a broader risk management plan. So that question again, what are you doing to reduce risk and eliminate uncertainty from your business? Have you got a plan, and are you managing risk in a comprehensive way or a planned way so that you can identify gaps as well, and then you can implement solutions to those gaps, whether that's insurance or other things, so that again, nothing's going to come out of left field, knock the business off track, cause you stress, cause you financial loss when you could have, with a bit of planning, have avoided it. The way that we work with customers is to help them identify all those areas of risk through a process that we use. Identify the areas, identify what strategies or what the potential cost is of those hazards if they occur, and then what are you doing about them? How are you managing them? What's in place? Oh, nothing's in place, right? Well, let's arrange something, and then you've closed that gap and you can move on. So it's a living process. There's a online portal that you can have access to where we'll help you build it, and then on an ongoing basis, it just helps you to keep those risk management plans up to date. And if anything new comes along, you can add it in, and keeps all your documents, risk management systems and processes all in one place. And that's it really. So if you have questions, please get in touch with us here at Builtin Insurance Brokers. We're specialists in insurance and risk management for construction. That's all we do. You can get us on 0800 284 584 or through our website, builtininsurance.co.nz. Cheers.